Well, it's been almost a year since I replaced the front door of my barn, and I'm finally going to take some time to put some molding around the door, or some casing. And one of the most important things to think about when you're designing your casing is how it's going to affect your baseboard molding. Now that's important if you're doing one door, but even more important if you're doing an entire house. So let me take a minute and I'll show you the design that I've come up with and how it's going to directly affect the design of my baseboard molding. Now there are a lot of different styles available at your home store, but I'm going to use a 1x4 to build my casing off of, and that's mainly because I think the style works with the barn, and also I had the material readily available. So again, I'm going to start with a 1x4 for my casing, and then I'm going to backband the 1x4 with a piece of poplar that I've ripped down to 1 3/8. And that gives me a little bit of a space here. I'm going to fill this space just to dress up the molding a little bit with a piece of shoe molding. And I think that's kind of a nice look. So this is where the idea of a backband really comes into play and how it affects your baseboard molding. So let's say that all of my doors are now cased. I've got my backbands on. It's time to put my baseboard molding on. The baseboard molding come and dead right into the backband. Then my base cap gets attached, and that dead ends right into the backband. And the very last piece of molding, my shoe molding, will be attached to the baseboard, and you can see how that dead ends very nicely into the backband. So now I have my casing designed, and all of my trim has been pre-primed, and I'm ready to start to install. What I want to do first is establish the distance between my door casing and my door jamb. And in this case, I want to make sure that the casing is far enough away from the door hardware that it doesn't get marred up by the hardware. I don't want that, so I'll have to set it back a little further than usual. So once I establish that measurement, I measure it and I cut a scrap piece of wood that thickness, and I'll put that scrap piece of wood flush to the back of the casing, or the back of the door jamb, and just trace a line. And this will be my reveal between the door casing and the door jamb. I've got all my reference lines on my jamb now, and now I'll take the first piece of casing, and I like to work left to right, right around the door. And I'll line my casing up to my reference line on the door jamb, and this will be the inside cut of my 45. I just finished attaching my first piece of casing. I nailed into the jamb, and I backed off about 1.5 inches or 2 inches to make sure I nailed into a stud in the wall. The next piece that will go on is the head piece. Now before I installed the first piece of casing, I checked to make sure that my miters were correct, and that's a good thing to do. Well, I'm almost finished. I've got my left casing on, my head piece, and now I'm going to put the last piece of casing on. But before I put this on, again, I'm going to double check my miter with this piece of scrap wood. And I did this actually beforehand, so I know it's good. I've got a nice tight miter here. And so the last thing I want to do is make sure you cut your bottom so it's square, the bottom of your casing. Put it in position. And then I just mark on the inside of the miter. And that's where I'll make my cut. It's a good idea to always glue your miters. I always put a little glue on the back of the casing also. Just a quick note, I wanted to mention that usually my reveal between my casing and the edge of my door jamb is about 1/4 inch. But because this is an exterior door, I had to back it up about 3/8. And even at 3/8, the hardware just misses the casing. So now I've got the casing on the door, and the next thing I'm going to do is put the backband on. I'm going to work the same way, left to right. Now I'm getting ready to attach my back band. So I'll put it in place and take a sharp pencil and mark it at the top of the casing, and that's where I'll put my miter. Right now I'm attaching the last piece of back band. I've got some glue on the miter. Well, I'm almost finished and it's starting to look pretty good. The last thing I'm going to do is dress up the molding a little bit with this piece of shoe molding that I'm going to put on the inside of the casing. Now again, I'm working around the door from the left to the right, and I'll put my shoe molding up against the back of the back band here, or the inside of the back band, and that's where I'll put my line where I want to cut my miter. Well, I'm just about finished. This is my last piece of molding. I'll mark it, cut it on the miter box, nail it to the casing, and then this door is finished. Okay, that's the last piece of molding. The door is finished being trimmed, and you can see now how the trim with the back band really affects the baseboard molding, the design of your baseboard molding. And so if you're going to trim a house, this is the order that you would work in. You put your casings on and your back bands if you decide to go with a design like that. And then once your casings and your back bands are attached to all your doors, you'd start to install your baseboard molding. So you can see how the baseboard dead ends nicely into the back band. And then the base cap is attached. And that also dead ends very nicely into the back band. And then the last piece of molding is your shoe molding. And this generally goes on after the floors are finished. And you can see how the shoe molding dead ends really nicely into the back band. Well, that really didn't take too long, and to be honest with you, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing trim work. A little bit of advice if you're thinking of doing your own trim work is start in the closets and start in rooms that might not get as much attention as, say, the main living room. And before you know it, you'll start to warm up and you'll really start to move along with a good amount of confidence. You can really save a lot of money doing your own trim work, and it's also very satisfying.